Hey guys, in this video we are going to talk about how to multiply when we have complex numbers. We'll go through a few different scenarios and hopefully we'll cover all possibilities within these. So our first scenario we're going to look at is how to multiply a real number by a complex number. So our example is 7 times the complex number 2 minus 4i. Now when we're doing this, you're really just going to need to remember how to distribute. It works the same way that we would in the past. Like the I we're treating kind of like a variable here. It works just like any other number. So we just really need to know how to distribute. We'll talk about a special property when we have I to certain powers. And also we need to know how to multiply binomials. But here we clearly don't need to multiply binomials. So our first example, we have a real number and we're multiplying it by this complex number. All we're going to do is distribute. So 7 times 2 is 14, 7 times negative 4, negative 28. We're going to have that I still attached, still the imaginary part. So 7 times the complex number 2 minus 4i is 14 minus 28i. And just like that, we're all done. So that's how you can multiply a real number by a complex. Now if we're multiplying an imaginary number, so a purely imaginary number, the one we have is 3i. And we're multiplying that by a complex number, 5 plus 2i, we're going to do the same thing. So let's go ahead, let's switch up to orange. You're going to go ahead and distribute 3i times 5, you're going to end up with 15i, and 3i times 2i, we're going to end up with 6, and you're going to have I squared. Notice your answer is not in the right form. We still want to be in the form a plus bi. So let's think about this I squared. And we kind of mentioned this in the very first video. If I is equal to the square root of negative 1, then I squared would be the square root of negative 1 squared. Square root of negative 1 squared, well, if you take the square root and then square, you're going to end up with whatever is underneath your radical, so it's just negative 1. And there will be a video in the future where we go into more detail of powers of I, but right now we need to know I squared is equal to negative 1. So going up here, we have 15i, and now this I'm going to move over to the left because I know what's going to happen. You're going to have 6, and I squared is negative 1. So your 15i will still stay, that's your imaginary part, but this 6 times negative 1 is negative 6, so you have a real part of negative 6, an imaginary part of 15. So 3, that imaginary, times the complex 5 plus 2i is equal to negative 6 plus 15i. So you have to be careful. Like I said, like the I works like a variable, but we do know the value of I squared. It does equal negative 1, so we can actually substitute that in and end up with a complex number in the right form here. Alright, we're going to do 2 more. Then you can try some of these on your own. So our next one now we have 2 complex numbers times one another. So 3 plus I, that's complex, times 7 minus 5i. And we're multiplying these 2 together. So just like you would multiply 2 binomials together, we're going to do the same thing here. So to do that, if you like FOIL, you could use FOIL. 3 times 7 is 21. 3 times negative 5i is negative 15i. 7 times I is plus 7i, and I times negative 5i is going to be negative 5i squared. So let's go ahead and combine our like terms here in the middle. We have minus 8i. This minus 5i squared is like minus 5 times negative 1, which is negative 5. So you have minus negative 5, which is plus 5. So we should end up with 26 minus 8i, real part 26, imaginary part negative 8, and you're all done. So you just have to be careful with this I squared now because we do know its value. Alright, so our last one, we have 8 minus 4i, and we are squaring that complex number. And like you should know, we are squaring, so you can either think of this like 8 minus 4i times 8 minus 4i, or if you know our special rule for squaring a binomial, whatever you want to use. I know 8 squared is 64. And then in the middle, you're going to have the 2ab, if you remember this. So a times b is 32. So 2 of that is going to be minus 64i. And then our last term would be plus the b squared. So 4i squared would be 16i squared. And then we need to simplify. So, let's make this an I. We have 64 minus 64i. And this last term is going to end up being a negative 16 because the I squared is negative 1. So 64 minus 16, we should get 48 minus 64i. And there is your product of this complex number being squared or multiplied by itself here. 48 minus 64i. So go ahead and try some of these on your own. Be careful with that I squared. Like the I works like a variable, but we do know its value. I is still equal to negative 1, and we should know now I squared is going to be equal to, or I is equal to the square root of negative 1, and the value of I squared is going to be equal to negative 1, so we can substitute that in to get in the right form here. Alright guys, go ahead and try some of these on your own and enjoy the rest of your day.